I am Francis, 68 years old and still reeling from what my daughter Eleanor told me last month. The call that shattered my heart with 5 simple words: "You are not invited, Mum." My own grandson William's wedding, an event I had anticipated for years. Everyone agrees, Eleanor explained, defending the $3 million trust fund I established for William that they were counting on. I responded with a quiet, "I understand," while making a decision that would change everything. Drop a comment where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. Sometimes love means standing firm with the people you cherish most. Life has a funny way of teaching us lessons when we least expect them. After my husband Robert passed away 15 years ago, I found myself rebuilding a life I never planned for. As a former English literature teacher at Franklin High School, I had modest savings but unlimited determination. What many people, including my daughter, never fully appreciated was how I transformed our financial situation through careful real estate investments in Boston's emerging neighborhoods. Eleanor was our only child, born when Robert and I were in our late 20s. She was a bright, curious girl with her father's amber eyes and my stubborn determination. We were incredibly close during her childhood and teenage years. I attended every soccer game, helped with every science project, and stayed up countless nights discussing books and dreams. When she left for college at Boston University, I cried for 3 days straight, even though she was only a 20-minute drive away. The first fracture in our relationship appeared when Eleanor met Greg during her junior year. Greg came from what he called old money, though his family's fortune had dwindled considerably over generations. He carried himself with an air of superiority that seemed to mask deep insecurity. From our first meeting, I sensed his dismissive attitude toward me, the public school teacher who spoke with a slight Midwestern accent that betrayed my Illinois roots. "Your mother is quite quaint," I overheard him tell Eleanor after our first dinner together. She giggled in response, a sound that felt like a small betrayal. After their wedding, Eleanor gradually adopted Greg's attitudes and prejudices. My suggestions were increasingly met with eye rolls or patronizing explanations about how things work in the real world. The warm, open girl I raised became distant, judgmental, and obsessed with appearances. Despite this growing distance with my daughter, I developed a special bond with my grandson, William. From the moment he was born 27 years ago, we connected in a way that reminded me of my relationship with Eleanor before Greg. William would spend weekends at my house, where we built elaborate Lego structures, read adventure stories, and baked chocolate chip cookies using his grandfather's secret recipe. "Grandma Francis," he'd say, flour dusting his cheeks, "you make everything fun." As William grew older, our relationship evolved but remained strong. When he struggled with Shakespeare in high school, I tutored him until Macbeth and Hamlet became his favorites. When he was accepted to Yale, I paid his tuition without hesitation, despite Eleanor and Greg's insistence they could handle it. I knew their finances were stretched thin by Greg's failed business ventures and their determination to maintain a lifestyle beyond their means. After William graduated with honors, I funded his 3-month backpacking trip through Europe, an experience I believed would broaden his perspectives before he started his career in finance. When he returned, he spent a week at my house, sharing stories about pasta making in Italy and hiking in the Swiss Alps. On his 25th birthday, I established a trust fund for William worth $3 million. The timing seemed perfect. He was mature enough to use it wisely, but young enough to let it truly shape his future. I intended the money to help him buy his first home, perhaps start his own business, or simply provide security as he built his life. "This is too much, Grandma," he said when I told him, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You deserve every penny," I assured him. "Just promise you'll use it for things that truly matter." He hugged me tightly then, and I believed our bond was unbreakable. Everything changed when William met Caitlin Sullivan 2 years ago. the daughter of a tech entrepreneur who had made billions in Silicon Valley. Caitlin was beautiful, polished, and unmistakably accustomed to luxury. The first time William brought her to my home for dinner, I noticed her subtle grimace at my modest dining room and the slight hesitation before she ate my homemade lasagna. "Your grandmother's house is charming," she told William later, not realizing I could hear them from the kitchen. "So retro." I tried to connect with Caitlin, asking about her interests and family, but her responses were perfunctory at best. When I mentioned my volunteer work, teaching English to immigrants, she replied, "That's nice," before steering the conversation toward the charity galas her parents hosted. As William's relationship with Caitlin deepened, I noticed troubling changes in my grandson. The humble, thoughtful young man began dropping casual references to yacht weekends and exclusive clubs. His visits became less frequent, his calls shorter. When we did speak, he often mentioned Caitlin's family connections or the celebrities they had dined near. Last spring, William announced their engagement over the phone rather than in person. I masked my hurt with enthusiasm, immediately offering to help with wedding plans. "That's really not necessary, Grandma," he said quickly. "Caitlin has very specific ideas, and her parents have connections with the top wedding planners in New York." 2 months later, Eleanor called to discuss the upcoming September wedding. I assumed she was finally including me in the preparations, perhaps even acknowledging that William and I should plan something special together before his big day. I could never have imagined the true purpose of her call. "Mum, we need to talk about William's wedding." Eleanor began, her voice carrying that artificially patient tone she had developed over years of explaining why my ways were outdated. "I've been waiting to hear the details," I replied eagerly. "I found the perfect dress last weekend, navy blue with a subtle silver thread, very appropriate for the mother of the groom." A heavy pause followed. "That's actually why I'm calling," Eleanor continued. "The thing is, Mum, you won't be attending the wedding." I laughed, assuming this was some bizarre joke. "What are you talking about?" "Of course I'll be at William's wedding." "No, Mum. You weren't included in the final guest list. Caitlin's family is very particular about the kind of event they're hosting. It's going to be covered in Vogue and attended by several celebrities. They felt you might not fit in with that crowd." The room seemed to tilt slightly as her words registered. "Not fit in, Eleanor. I'm William's grandmother. I've been part of every important moment of his life." "I know this is difficult," she continued, her tone suggesting she was explaining something to a child. "But everyone agrees it's for the best. The Sullivans want a certain aesthetic for their event, and they're paying for everything. Everyone agrees." I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. "Including William." Another painful pause. "Yes, Mum. William understands this is what Caitlin and her family want. He doesn't want to create conflict." I sat down, my legs suddenly unable to support me. "Have I embarrassed you somehow? Done something wrong?" "It's not that you've done anything wrong," Eleanor replied with exaggerated patience. "It's just that this wedding has a certain sophistication level. The Sullivans are hosting senators, tech billionaires, even a minor European royal. You would feel uncomfortable." Translation: I was too old, too ordinary, too unfashionable to be seen at my own grandson's wedding. "I need to speak with William," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "He's very busy with work and wedding preparations," Eleanor replied quickly. "It's better if you accept this decision, Mum. Fighting it will only create tension for William during what should be a happy time." After ending the call, I tried repeatedly to reach William. My calls went unanswered. My texts received brief, non-committal responses about being swamped with work and promising to call soon. That call never came. Disbelieving that my entire family would exclude me, I called my nephew, Patrick, Eleanor's younger brother. His shocked reaction confirmed my worst fears. "What are you talking about, Aunt Frances? Of course I'm invited to the wedding. We all got our save the dates months ago." When I explained what Eleanor had told me, Patrick fell silent for several moments. "This is Caitlin's doing," he finally said. "I overheard her mother at the engagement party talking about the guest list. She referred to you as William's rustic grandmother and said something about the wedding having a certain visual standard. It was disgusting, but I never thought William would actually go along with it. The pain of this betrayal was unlike anything I had experienced since Robert's death. I spent the next 3 days alternating between tears and disbelief. How could the grandson, who had spent countless weekends baking cookies in my kitchen, now decide I wasn't worthy of witnessing his marriage? My closest friend Martha came over when I finally shared the situation with her. She found me surrounded by photo albums of William growing up, his first steps, lost teeth graduation. "This is beyond disrespectful," Martha fumed. "It's cruel, and you've done everything for that boy." "I keep thinking I must have misunderstood," I admitted. "William wouldn't do this to me." "But he has," Martha said gently. "And you need to decide how you're going to respond. You don't have to accept this treatment, Frances." That evening, Eleanor called again. "Have you had time to process our conversation, Mum? I know it's disappointing, but I'm sure you understand why this is necessary." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Yes, Eleanor, I understand completely." "Oh, good," she sighed, relieved by my apparent acceptance. "I'm glad you're being reasonable about this." "I understand far more than you realize," I replied, ending the call before she could hear the break in my voice. What I understood was that it was time to stop being the endlessly accommodating grandmother who never stood up for herself. For the first time in my life, I was going to demand the respect I deserved. That night, sleep eluded me as I considered my position and my options. The hurt was profound, but beneath it burned a slow anger that I rarely allowed myself to feel. I hadn't raised my daughter to be this person. I hadn't spoiled my grandson only to be discarded when I became inconvenient to his new lifestyle. At my kitchen table, surrounded by financial documents, I took stock of my generosity over the years. Beyond William's $3 million trust fund, there had been endless smaller contributions, the down payment for Eleanor and Greg's first home, the bailout when Greg's investment firm faced bankruptcy, private school tuition for William, the luxury car I purchased for William's college graduation. For decades, I had quietly supported my family financially, while they increasingly dismissed me personally. The irony wasn't lost on me. They considered me unsuitable for a society wedding while depending on my money to maintain their place in that society. The trust fund I had established for William had been structured to give him full access on his 30th birthday, just 3 years away. Until then, I retained certain controls as the trustee, though I had never intended to exercise them. The fund generated significant income already, which I knew William and Caitlin had been using to supplement their lifestyle while working in finance. Early the next morning, I called my attorney Gordon Peterson, who had handled my financial affairs since Robert's death. "Frances, what a pleasant surprise," Gordon greeted me. "Is this about the additional contribution to William's trust you mentioned last month?" "Not exactly," I replied. "I need to know what options I have regarding the trust, specifically whether I can freeze it temporarily or add new conditions." Gordon's tone shifted immediately. "Has something happened?" When I explained the situation, Gordon's professional demeanor cracked slightly. "They excluded you from the wedding after everything you've done. Apparently, I would detract from the aesthetic they're aiming for," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Gordon cleared his throat. Well, as the grantor and trustee, you retain significant control until the trust fully vests with William. There's actually a gratitude and respect clause we included, standard language in many trusts, though rarely invoked. It essentially states that the beneficiary must demonstrate appropriate gratitude and respect toward the grantor. And if they don't, I asked, then disbursements can be frozen until the trustee, that's you, is satisfied that the conditions are again being met. We scheduled an appointment for that afternoon. As I dressed in my best suit, I reflected on what I was about to do. This wasn't about punishing William or withholding money out of spite. It was about establishing that relationships require mutual respect. It was about teaching a lesson I had apparently failed to convey through years of unconditional giving. Gordon's office was sleek and modern with views of Boston Harbor. As we reviewed the trust documents, he pointed out the specific language that would allow me to temporarily freeze the trust without dissolving it completely. This approach preserves the principle, Gordon explained. No one can access the funds, but the investments continue to grow. You're simply pausing disbursements until certain conditions are met. And those conditions would be, I asked. That's entirely at your discretion as trustee. You could specify that William must demonstrate respect and gratitude in whatever form you deem appropriate. I thought carefully before responding. I want the language to be clear, but not vindictive. Something like, disbursements are suspended pending evidence of appropriate respect and appreciation from the beneficiary. Gordon nodded approvingly. That's perfectly reasonable. It leaves the door open for reconciliation while establishing a clear boundary. As I signed the documents making the freeze official, I felt a complex mixture of sadness and resolution. I was not destroying William's inheritance or acting out of pure hurt. I was simply saying there are consequences for treating people as disposable, especially those who have consistently shown you love. Should I inform William about this change? I asked Gordon. The trust administrator will notify him when he next attempts to access funds, Gordon replied. That seems appropriate given the circumstances. I nodded, tucked the documents into my handbag, and walked out into the bright Boston afternoon. For the first time since Eleanor's devastating call, I felt a sense of control returning. Whatever happened next would be on my terms, not theirs. The wedding date approached with excruciating slowness. Each day brought fresh pain as I imagined preparations continuing without me. The rehearsal dinner I wouldn't attend, the mother-son dance, where Eleanor would stand in my place, the family photos where my absence would never be explained. On the actual wedding day, I woke early and made myself tea in the blue porcelain cup William had given me for Christmas years ago. The house felt unbearably quiet. I spent the morning looking through photo albums, William losing his first tooth, riding his new bicycle, standing proudly beside the science fair project we had worked on together. Against my better judgment, I found myself checking social media throughout the day. Eleanor's friend Susan posted pictures of the wedding venue, an exclusive estate in the Hamptons with sweeping ocean views. Another post showed elaborate floral arrangements being delivered, white orchids and roses imported from Holland. The hashtag #Sullivan-Walton wedding revealed glimpses of the symphony orchestra setting up and champagne towers being constructed. By evening, my feed was flooded with images of the ceremony and reception. William looking handsome in a custom tuxedo. Caitlin radiant in a gown that reportedly cost more than most cars. Eleanor beaming beside Greg, both dripping in designer clothes and borrowed jewels. Everyone seemed ecstatically happy in my absence. A particularly painful photo showed the family portrait, William and Caitlin surrounded by both sets of parents, siblings, and assorted relatives, including distant cousins I had only met once or twice. Every family member was there except me. Around midnight, as I was finally preparing for bed, my phone rang. William's name flashed on the screen. the first direct contact in weeks. My hand shook as I answered. Grandma. His voice was slurred, the background noisy with music and laughter. William, I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. Congratulations on your wedding. You know what? He said, words running together slightly. I missed you today. Isn't that weird? Mum said you couldn't come because you were sick, but I kept thinking you should be here. My breath caught. Eleanor had told him I was sick, another lie to protect their decision to exclude me. I wasn't sick, William, I said quietly. Huh. Then where were you? Everyone else came. His confusion seemed genuine, which somehow hurt even more. I need to go, William. It sounds like you're enjoying your reception. We can talk when you're back from your honeymoon. Okay, Grandma. Love you. He hung up before I could respond. The knowledge that Eleanor had lied to William about my absence added another layer to the betrayal. Did William truly not know I had been deliberately excluded? Or was this a convenient fiction they had created to avoid consequences? 2 weeks later, as William and Caitlin enjoyed their honeymoon at an exclusive resort in the Maldives, which I later learned was partly funded by income from the trust the consequences I had set in motion finally revealed themselves. My phone exploded with notifications one Tuesday afternoon. 3 missed calls from William, 2 from Eleanor, and 1 from Greg. A flurry of text messages demanded immediate attention. I took a deep breath before listening to the first voicemail. Grandma, what the hell? William's voice was tight with anger. The trust administrator says all disbursements have been frozen. They said I need to contact you immediately. Call me back. Now. Eleanor's message was equally frantic. Mum, what have you done? William just called us hysterical about the trust. You can't do this. Call me back immediately. Greg's message was predictably threatening. Francis, you've crossed a line. We're consulting our attorneys about this trust manipulation. This is elder spite, and no court will uphold it. I waited until evening before returning William's call, giving myself time to prepare emotionally for the confrontation. Grandma, how could you do this? William demanded immediately. We're in the middle of placing an offer on a condo in Manhattan. The trust income was part of our financial plan. I'm surprised you have time to call me now, I replied calmly. You've been too busy to return my calls for months. Is that what this is about? You're punishing me for being busy with wedding planning? This is about being told I wasn't welcome at my only grandson's wedding because I might embarrass you in front of Caitlin's wealthy friends. A long silence followed. Who told you that? He finally asked, his voice smaller. Your mother informed me that everyone, including you, agreed I shouldn't attend, that I wouldn't fit in with the sophisticated crowd Caitlin's family invited. That's not... I never... He stammered. Mum said you were sick, that you couldn't travel. I was never consulted, William. I was simply informed that my presence wasn't wanted. After everything we've shared, after supporting you emotionally and financially your entire life, I was discarded because I might not look wealthy enough for wedding photos in Vogue. Grandma, I swear I didn't know. This must be a misunderstanding. It's not a misunderstanding. I spoke with Patrick, who confirmed that Caitlin's mother specifically objected to my presence. And rather than standing up for me, you all decided I was dispensable. Another call from Eleanor beeped through. Your mother is calling again, I noted. Perhaps you should ask her about the misunderstanding. But the trust, William pressed. You can't legally do this. Actually, I can. The trust includes conditions about gratitude and respect. Excluding your grandmother from your wedding while depending on her financial support fails to meet those conditions. This is about money. You're holding my inheritance hostage. No, William, this is about consequences. For years, I've given freely without expecting anything in return, except basic respect. That respect was violated in the most painful way possible. Now you're experiencing the consequence of that choice. We'll challenge this legally, he threatened, sounding alarmingly like Greg. You're welcome to try, I replied. Gordon assures me my position is legally sound. But even if it weren't, is this really how you want to proceed? Fighting your grandmother in court over money while avoiding the real issue of how profoundly you've hurt me. The call ended with William still angry and defensive. Minutes later, Eleanor called, cycling through accusations, guilt trips, and finally tears. How could you embarrass us like this? She demanded. William and Caitlin are devastated. Almost as devastating as being told I wasn't good enough to attend my grandson's wedding, I replied. The weeks that followed were tense and uncomfortable. I received angry emails from Greg threatening legal action. Tearful voicemails from Eleanor about how I was destroying the family, and confused messages from William that oscillated between apologies and accusations. Throughout it all, I maintained my position. The trust would remain frozen until I received a genuine acknowledgement of the hurt caused and sincere remorse for the exclusion. The situation was painful, but for the first time in years, I wasn't the only one experiencing consequences for my family's actions. I had finally drawn a boundary, and no amount of tantrum throwing would make me erase it. While William, Eleanor, and Greg focused entirely on the frozen trust, an unexpected chain reaction was developing within our extended family and social circle. It began with a carefully worded Facebook post from Caitlin lamenting toxic family members who try to control others through financial manipulation. Though she didn't mention me by name, the target was obvious. This prompted questions from mutual acquaintances who had noticed my absence from the wedding photos. When asked directly by my sister Susan why I hadn't attended such an important family event, I simply told the truth. I was informed my presence would detract from the sophisticated atmosphere they wanted to create. Susan was horrified. William said you couldn't come because you had pneumonia. I specifically asked about you during the reception. Similar conversations played out across our family network as the truth emerged. Patrick confronted Eleanor directly during a family dinner. You told me Aunt Frances chose not to come because she doesn't like to travel anymore, he accused. How could you lie about something so important? Eleanor's stammering response about complicated family dynamics convinced no one. Patrick's wife, Maria, who had always admired my relationship with William, was particularly vocal in her disappointment. Frances was more of a mother to William than Eleanor in many ways, she told other family members. She never missed a single school event, while Eleanor and Greg were networking at charity galas. Even Caitlin's carefully constructed narrative began to crumble when William's college roommate Jake directly asked him at a dinner party, "Dude, how could you not invite your grandmother?" She paid for our entire spring break trip senior year and made us those care packages during finals. According to Patrick, who witnessed the exchange, William had no good answer. Caitlin attempted to intervene, suggesting that elderly relatives often prefer to avoid the stress of large events. But Jake wasn't buying it. Frances isn't some fragile old lady, he countered. She hiked the entire Freedom Trail with us when you were too hungover to give us the tour of Boston you promised. As more people learned the truth, the pressure on William and Caitlin intensified. Caitlin's parents, initially the driving force behind my exclusion, found themselves facing subtle social consequences as well. At a charity function, the chairman's wife reportedly asked Mrs. Sullivan directly, "Is it true you banned your new daughter-in-law's grandmother from the wedding because she's a retired teacher? How nouveau riche of you." The comment, delivered with a smile, but designed to sting, hit its mark. In the rarefied social circles, the Sullivans aspired to join old money disdained such obvious status consciousness. Through it all, I maintained a dignified silence in public, while being completely honest when asked directly. I neither sought revenge nor accepted the role of victim. When well-meaning friends suggested I should forgive and forget for the sake of family harmony, I gently but firmly declined. Forgiveness without acknowledgement of harm isn't healing, I explained. It's erasure. 3 weeks after the trust was frozen, William texted asking to meet in person. Just you and me, Grandma. No parents, no Caitlin. We need to talk. I agreed, suggesting he come to my home the following Sunday afternoon. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope that real communication might be possible. Sunday arrived with golden autumn light streaming through my kitchen windows. I baked William's favorite oatmeal chocolate chip cookies, more from habit than strategic reconciliation planning. The familiar routine of measuring flour and cracking eggs calmed my nerves as I prepared for what would surely be an emotional conversation. The doorbell rang precisely at 2 o'clock. William stood on my porch, looking uncharacteristically disheveled, his normally perfectly styled hair slightly messy dark circles under his eyes. He had lost weight since the wedding. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "The cookies just came out of the oven." William paused in the entryway, looking around as if seeing my home for the first time. The bookshelves Robert had built, the collection of sea glass we had gathered on family vacations, the wall of photos documenting generations of our family. "I forgot how much I love this house," he said quietly. In the kitchen, I poured coffee, while William sat at the same table where he had done homework throughout his childhood. The familiarity of the scene contrasted sharply with the tension between us. "I assume you want to discuss the trust." I began, placing cookies on a plate between us. William reached for a cookie, then stopped himself. "Actually, I need to understand what happened with the wedding invitation first. Mum and Dad are saying one thing, Caitlin's parents another. I feel caught in the middle of something I don't fully understand." "What exactly did your mother tell you?" I asked. "Initially, she said you weren't feeling well enough to travel. When I suggested postponing until you were better, she said you had insisted we proceed. After the wedding, when I called you drunk from the reception, I started realizing something was wrong. Then when the trust was frozen..." He trailed off, staring into his coffee. "William, I was explicitly told by your mother that I wasn't invited because Caitlin's family felt I wouldn't fit in with the sophisticated crowd they had assembled, that everyone, including you, had agreed to this decision." The color drained from William's face. "I never agreed to that. Never. There were discussions about limiting the guest list, and Caitlin's mother kept questioning whether certain relatives needed to be there. But your name was never specifically mentioned. At least not when I was present. So you never noticed that your grandmother wasn't included in any of the planning? That I never received an invitation, that no one discussed my role in the ceremony with me?" William's eyes filled with tears. "I assumed Mum was coordinating with you. I was so caught up in work and wedding details and trying to impress Caitlin's family that I failed to pay attention to something fundamental. And when your mother told you I was sick, I believed her," he admitted. "I called you that night because I genuinely missed you and felt guilty for proceeding with the wedding while you were ill." I let his words hang in the air between us. Part of me wanted to immediately comfort him, as I had when he was small, but another part knew this was a necessary reckoning. "Even if you weren't directly involved in the decision," I said finally, "the fact remains that no one in our family stood up for me. No one thought my relationship with you was important enough to protect." "You're right," William whispered. "I should have noticed. I should have checked directly with you. I got so caught up in Caitlin's vision of the perfect wedding and her parents' expectations that I lost sight of what really matters." "And what matters, William?" "Family, real relationships, the people who have always been there." He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. Not the superficial connections Caitlin's parents cultivate based on status and money. A heavy silence filled the kitchen as William finally took a cookie and broke it in half without eating it. "I'm so sorry, Grandma," he said, his voice breaking. "I can't believe I let this happen. When I think about everything you've done for me, not just the money, but the time and love and support, I'm ashamed of myself." For the first time, I saw genuine remorse rather than frustration over the financial consequences. I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. "I didn't freeze the trust to punish you, William. I did it because I needed you to understand that relationships require mutual respect, that my love and support shouldn't be taken for granted." William nodded miserably. "I understand now, and I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." "It won't be simple," I cautioned. "This situation has revealed serious problems in how our family functions. Your mother's willingness to lie to you about me, your father's mercenary approach to family relationships, Caitlin and her parents' elitist attitudes." William's expression grew troubled. "That's another issue. When Caitlin found out about the trust being frozen, she was furious. Not just about the money, but about the principle. She doesn't understand why I should have to apologize for having a beautiful wedding just because Grandma's feelings are hurt." "And what do you think?" I asked carefully. "I think I've been looking at my relationships through a distorted lens," he replied slowly. "Since meeting Caitlin, I've started valuing things that don't actually matter. Status, appearances, connections. I've been trying to become someone my younger self wouldn't even recognize." He finally ate a piece of cookie, closing his eyes briefly at the familiar taste. "These past few weeks have been clarifying. Caitlin and I have been fighting constantly. She doesn't understand why I'm choosing my grandmother's side, as she puts it." "You're facing a difficult choice," I acknowledged. "Standing up for what's right often comes at a cost." William looked directly at me. "I want to fix this, Grandma. Not just because of the trust, but because you deserve better than how you've been treated. I just don't know if Caitlin will ever understand that." As William left that afternoon, he hugged me tightly, something he hadn't done in years. "I'll make this right," he promised. "Whatever it takes." I watched him drive away with a mixture of hope and apprehension. William seemed sincerely remorseful, but he was caught between opposing forces. His new wife and her family on one side, his grandmother and her principles on the other. Which would ultimately prove stronger remained to be seen. The next 3 months brought dramatic changes to our family dynamic. William's newfound awareness created ripples that affected all his relationships, particularly his young marriage. 2 weeks after our heart-to-heart, William called to invite me to dinner at his and Caitlin's apartment. "I want to begin rebuilding our relationship," he explained, "and I need Caitlin to truly get to know you." The dinner was predictably tense. Caitlin greeted me with forced politeness, her smile never reaching her eyes. The apartment was impeccably decorated but felt sterile and impersonal, like a hotel suite rather than a home. "William speaks so highly of you," Caitlin said, as she served an elaborate appetizer that had clearly been catered. "He tells me you were quite the influential teacher in your day." "I loved teaching," I replied simply. Helping young people discover literature was deeply rewarding. "How quaint," she murmured. "My mother always says teaching is a noble profession for those who prioritize fulfillment over financial success." William winced visibly. "Caitlin, please." "What?" "It was a compliment," she insisted, though her tone suggested otherwise. Throughout dinner, William tried valiantly to highlight commonalities between us: my love of French cinema, Caitlin's art history background, my volunteer work, her charity committee memberships. But the fundamental disconnect was impossible to ignore. Caitlin viewed the world through a lens of status and acquisition. I valued education, personal growth, and authentic connections. Francis William tells me you've expressed concerns about not feeling appreciated enough by our family, Caitlin finally said over dessert. I hope tonight has helped alleviate those worries. Appreciation isn't something that can be manufactured in a single dinner, I replied gently. It's demonstrated through consistent actions and genuine respect. Caitlin's smile tightened. Well, we're all trying very hard to accommodate your feelings. This isn't about accommodation, William interjected, surprising both of us with his firmness. It's about acknowledging that what happened with the wedding was wrong. Grandma deserved better from all of us. Caitlin's facade cracked slightly. The wedding was perfect. Everyone who mattered was there. The words hung in the air like a slap. William set down his fork with deliberate care. That's exactly the problem, Caitlin. My grandmother matters tremendously to me, and the fact that you and your family can't see that is deeply concerning. The evening ended shortly thereafter with promises to do this again soon that none of us believed. As William walked me to my car, he apologized profusely. She's trying in her way, he said, though he didn't sound convinced. Are you happy, William? I asked quietly. He stared at the ground for a long moment before answering. I thought I knew what would make me happy. Now I'm not so sure. Over the following weeks, William began visiting me regularly without Caitlin. We resumed our Sunday afternoon traditions, baking, discussing books, or simply talking about life. During one such visit, he revealed that he and Caitlin were seeing a marriage counselor. She doesn't understand why I'm obsessed with rebuilding my relationship with you. She thinks it's just about the trust money. And what do you think it's about? I asked. Values, he replied without hesitation. This situation has forced me to examine what I truly value versus what I've been conditioned to pursue. Success isn't just about money or status. It's about integrity and meaningful relationships. A month later, Eleanor reached out asking to meet for lunch. I agreed with cautious optimism. At a quiet cafe downtown, my daughter seemed smaller somehow, less certain of herself than I had seen her in years. I need to apologize, Mum, she began after we ordered. What I did, lying to William, excluding you from the wedding, was inexcusable. Why did you do it? I asked the question that had haunted me for months. Eleanor stared into her water glass. The Sullivans made it clear they wanted a certain type of event. Mrs. Sullivan specifically mentioned that having a retired school teacher at the high-profile tables would disrupt their carefully planned seating arrangements. Greg thought maintaining good relations with them could help his business. And you chose their approval over your mother's feelings. Yes, she admitted. I've been doing that for years, choosing Greg's priorities, his social climbing, his values, over everything I was raised to believe. I've become someone I don't recognize or particularly like. For the first time, I glimpsed my actual daughter beneath the polished exterior she had constructed. The conversation that followed was raw but healing. Eleanor acknowledged how Greg's influence had gradually separated her from her own values. She expressed genuine remorse for how she had treated me over the years. William's stance has forced me to reconsider everything, she admitted. Seeing him stand up to Caitlin and her family made me realize how rarely I've stood up to Greg. By Christmas, a tentative new family dynamic had emerged. I hosted a holiday dinner at my home, something that hadn't happened in years. William came without Caitlin, who was spending the holidays with her family. Eleanor attended without Greg, who had prior commitments. As we shared a meal in my modest dining room, there was an authenticity to our interaction that had been missing for too long. We weren't pretending to be something we weren't. We were simply family with all our imperfections and complicated history. After careful consideration and discussions with Gordon, I decided to unfreeze William's trust with modified terms. The new agreement maintained the respect and gratitude clause, but added specific provisions about family inclusion and communication. William readily agreed to the changes. The money was never the point, he acknowledged. The lesson was what I needed. In January, William and Caitlin announced they were expecting a baby. Despite the joy of this news, their marriage continued to show signs of strain. William's evolving priorities clashed repeatedly with Caitlin's social aspirations. She wants the baby's nursery featured in a magazine, William confided during one visit. I just want a healthy child and a loving home. As Caitlin's pregnancy progressed, something unexpected happened. During a difficult doctor's appointment when William was traveling for work, Caitlin called me for support. Sitting together in the waiting room, her carefully constructed persona cracked. I'm terrified, she admitted. My mother's idea of childcare is hiring the perfect nanny and planning Instagram-worthy birthday parties. I don't know how to actually be a mother. For the first time, I saw vulnerability beneath her polished exterior. No one knows at first, I assured her. You learn as you go with love as your guide. Over the following months, Caitlin and I developed a cautious rapport built on her genuine need for maternal guidance. She began asking questions about how I had raised Eleanor, what mistakes I had made, what wisdom I could share. Slowly, the young woman obsessed with appearances revealed a deeper self-seeking connection. My parents never talk about difficulties or failures, she explained during one prenatal class I attended with her. Everything in our family had to look perfect, even when it wasn't. By the time my great-granddaughter Lily was born in August, our family had transformed. William and Caitlin were working through their differences with new respect for each other's values. Eleanor had separated from Greg and was rediscovering her authentic self, and I had established clear boundaries while keeping my heart open to reconciliation. Holding tiny Lily in my arms, I marveled at how a painful exclusion had ultimately led to more genuine inclusion. By refusing to accept disrespect, I had paradoxically created space for deeper connection. I want Lily to know her great-grandmother, Caitlin told me in the hospital, surprising us both. I want her to have what I never did, family relationships based on love rather than appearances. As I look back on this challenging chapter of our family story, I realize that standing firm was the most loving thing I could have done, not just for myself, but for William, Eleanor, and even Caitlin. By refusing to enable toxic patterns, I created an opportunity for genuine growth. Not every family conflict results in such positive transformation. Some boundaries remain necessary. Eleanor and Greg's relationship continues to be troubled. Caitlin still occasionally slips into old judgmental patterns. But we now face these challenges honestly, rather than pretending harmony for appearance's sake. Have you ever had to stand firm with family members who took you for granted? Did setting boundaries ultimately strengthen your relationships? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more reflections on family dignity and growth. Don't forget to share this video with someone who might need encouragement to stand up for themselves with love. Thank you for joining me today, and remember, sometimes the most loving thing we can do is draw a line and say, no further.